On October 7, 2021, Topher Florence tweeted, "Back in the day, if you did a TV show called Surf Dracula, you'd see that fool surfing every week in new adventures. But in the streaming era, the entire first season got to be a long-ass flashback to how he got the surfboard, until you finally get to see him surf for 5 minutes in the finale." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. This is, in my opinion, the most perfect and concise statement on the streaming era of television in existence, because it gets at the problem of the streaming era of television. Namely, if I can editorialize, it's not television. This is very personal to me because I did go to school for television writing. I have a degree in dramatic writing with a focus in television writing. And I just constantly hate seeing these new shows that get super lauded and have great casts and great directors and cost $200 million. And you watch them and you're like, this is just a 6-hour movie stretched across chapters. And that's fine, I guess, but it's definitely not television. And as the Surf Dracula tweet gets at, they're so often not even narratively interesting. It's just like a slow reveal of a thing that you learn at the end. You see Dracula on the surfboard, and then you're done. It's like, I would much rather watch the show that starts with Dracula being on the surfboard. But no, that's not prestige enough. That's not a 6-hour movie enough. And obviously so much of the reason why this tweet is iconic is because Surf Dracula is a very funny thing to imagine. If it was a more realistic sounding television show, I don't think it would catch on as much. Especially because you can just say Surf Dracula and people who know this tweet know what you're talking about. And I do appreciate that even television writers like Will Landman, who worked on shows like Citadel and Raised by Wolves, American Gods, say, "I love that Surf Dracula has become colloquially used in the streaming era. It's an all-timer." Because it gets at a problem that otherwise would take sentences and sentences to explain. And I think that a lot of people, like myself, who grew up loving television, like real television, 22 episodes or 16 episodes a season television, have had a hard time explaining why so many of the super lauded shows in the streaming era that are only like 6 episodes long don't work for us. There are plenty of examples of this phenomenon, and I have not watched many of the things that I'm going to reference, so if you disagree with these being Surf Dracula shows, don't talk to me about it. Like when Cooper Co. pointed out that the Halo television show ended its first season without even getting to the titular Halo. Carlos Alonso Morales said, "So the show turned out even worse than Surf Dracula?" Lee Walton references it, making it about the Rings of Power, saying that if you did a show called Rings of Power, you see those fools using rings every week, ... And when this tweet was posted to Reddit, many people pointed out that the Marvel Netflix shows were like this. Specifically, MT Kinetic Mountain pointed out that Iron Fist didn't really have his Iron Fist powers until the end of season 1. I can't believe I watched that entire first season, and thankfully I did not watch the second season. And a reason it's come up a lot for me recently is because I do a podcast about the MCU, and there was much hullabaloo about the Daredevil show where it had to basically be stopped halfway through production and retooled because of problems with the scripts. And specifically what came out when they retooled it is that apparently Daredevil didn't even get into his costume at all until episode 4. And that led Valentine Steele to say, "LOL, the episode 4 thing makes me think that someone finally showed Feige the Surf Dracula tweet." And I have to say, watching the current iteration of the show, I think it mostly avoids the Surf Dracula problems. But I think what's described here and what I've read beyond this about the original version of the show, it was very Surf Dracula-y. It was very much like Matt Murdock's a lawyer, and we occasionally allude to him being Daredevil, yada yada yada. And eventually he finally gets to be Daredevil for 3 seconds. It's like, nah man, I'm tuning in because I want to watch a blind lawyer beat up some people. And a lot of people joke or make speculations about upcoming shows having Surf Dracula problems. A good joke version is when Blake quote tweeted the announcement of the Benjamin Franklin series starring Michael Douglas. He said, "Surf Dracula moment where he doesn't fly the kite with the key until the last episode." I think this is funny for multiple reasons, but mostly because Blake seems to think that the kite with the key on it is the most important moment of Benjamin Franklin's life. And when the first still came out of the DC series Lanterns, Jeremy Lovesyall said, "From the creators of Surf Dracula," because in the photo it just looked like they're regular dudes. And you can imagine, and this might not be the case, James Gunn has a pretty good track record of not Surf Draculaing, but you can imagine a version of this show where he doesn't really get the ring until like episode 9 to 10. And Lee Beaton pointed out when there was that announcement for the reboot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, he says, "The Buffy sequel, or reboot, or whatever they do, is going to be the starkest example of the Surf Dracula problem in TV history." Because Buffy was a 90s show, and it very much was an anti-Surf Dracula show. Buffy was slaying monsters every episode, often different monsters every episode. You don't have to wait to the end of season 1 for her to pick up a wooden stake. But you can easily imagine the new version of it, which is probably only going to get an 8-episode run on some streamer, not being like that at all. And while it was originally about television, and it technically shouldn't apply to movies, in the franchise era of movies, it definitely can apply to movies. Like Sadan Hadlatka had a great review of Madam Web where he said, "Madam Web is like if they didn't even let Surf Dracula buy his board, let alone hit the waves." Because for those of you who have seen Madam Web, you know that of the 4 main heroes in the movie, 3 of them never actually have powers in the movie at all. The shots of them having powers and whatnot that were in the trailer are just like brief visions that Madam Web has. And then a review of Joker Folie à Deux, which I found very funny from Val, is Joker 2 is like if in a sequel it turned out Surf Dracula was bad at surfing and he stopped as soon as he started. Because the original Joker, a movie I don't think is particularly good, is really one long Surf Dracula. It's not a huge problem because it's going for other things tonally, so it's not really about the plot of him becoming Joker, but it is still true in the movie that he really doesn't become what we think of as Joker until the way end of the movie. Which is what makes it all the more funny that Joker Folie à Deux, the sequel, is mostly him not being that version of the Joker at all. In fact, he's sort of mocking the audience for wanting him to be that version of the Joker. Now, Joker Folie à Deux is awful, but I do think it's very funny that the movie is even awful to people who like the first one. And I've referenced Surf Dracula dozens of times before this, and it never occurred to me until I was looking through replies to the original tweet for this episode that there's a contradiction to Surf Dracula. Because as Ryan Kirby points out, Surf Dracula, if he was going surfing in the day, would burn up the moment he got into the sun. Now, obviously you can imagine Surf Dracula surfing at night, but still. I just don't know how I never thought about that. Speaking of seeing Surf Dracula, a mostly unrelated tweet from JT quote tweets the original tweet with the photo of Mark Zuckerberg on the waveboard, where his face is all white so he looks like Surf Dracula. It's funny. And yes, you can buy a print of a cartoon version of Surf Dracula. Why do you even ask? I just think that this tweet is extremely valuable, like I said, because it makes a complex point very simple. And I think the fact that this tweet's really popular and is referenced a lot shows that there is an appetite to go away from the Surf Dracula-ing of television. Like when Eric Baker pointed out that it's so funny that Severance is succeeding by rediscovering the forgotten ancient knowledge that audiences enjoy it when things happen on the TV shows they watch. Calling Dr. Love said, the modern Surf Dracula methods of TV shows is disappearing, and I think that's straight beautiful. And I hope that Calling Dr. Love is right. Because I fell in love with 22-episode television, not 6-episode television. I love when you can tune in every week and be like, oh, this is the episode that this happens. Not this is part 4 of the 6-part arc that's all the same story. Even if it's a show that is continuing, something like Mad Men or whatever, there are still episodes where individual things happen. I like that I know that the best episode of Mad Men is The Suitcase, because I can tell you what happens in that self-contained episode. Movies are great. I love movies. I collect Blu-rays. I love movies as an art form a lot. But movies are not television. They're things that makes television unique. And the best way to make television, I think, is to get Dracula's ass on that board 5 minutes into the pilot and show him surfing a bunch. Have him going on surfing adventures. Have him compete against the Mummy in a surf competition. Have him butt heads with Frankenstein the lifeguard. I don't want to see Dracula in his castle in Transylvania in episode 4 being like, oh, I want to catch some waves. Just give me Dracula surfing. Make TV again. Follow me for a new tweet every day, and if you like the show, consider subscribing on Patreon, patreon.com/Museum of Twitter. It's $3, and you get into my Discord where you can vote when I cover on Subscriber Sunday, and you get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter.